The Bastion of Horror, written and read by Chris Halton. I was angry. So we could have been the sacrificial goats if matters turned out differently. Dr. Hesse was, in his life, an evolutionary scientist in the field of genetics. After the end of World War II, he was recruited by His Majesty's government, where his work gained significant recognition in academic circles. He had published theoretical papers in The Lancet that were years ahead of his contemporaries. Although a German-born, Hesse lived in neutral Switzerland during the war, where he acquired great wealth through medical patents. From these assets, he built and established a laboratory, situated amid the bleakness of Dartmoor, which the Home Office protected. Security was very tight, and the grey blockhouse-like concrete property was ringed with double electrified fencing, rolled barbed wire, and patrols of ex-military servicemen guarding the interior and perimeter. Such was the secrecy of his work, which was restricted to a coterie of 5 scientists, all experts in the field of genetics. Everybody who worked there was under strict orders not to travel outside of the confines of the laboratory site unless authorized, and not to fraternize with locals. The entire site, spanning a few acres, occupied a prominent position above one of the highest tors in Dartmoor. Naturally, some resentment arose among the locals, who had previously used the site for hiking and picnics. Working with Hesse among the 5 were 2 former Nazi-era scientists who were headhunted at the end of the war by the British because of their medical and scientific expertise. The remaining 2 were of British and French origins. Visitors, understandably, were few and far between, except for a monthly delivery of food and supplies. Even the electricity supply was independent of the national electrical grid, having its hydroelectric power station fed by a nearby river and a reserve standby diesel-electric generator in the event of a breakdown. Nobody knew what was happening inside the Hesse compound, and rumours speculated that it was secret high-level government research work connected to the Cold War with Russia. And that was the state of things until the early 1950s when, well, to put it simply, some locals were reported missing to the police and none were found. In every case, the police would organise a search with walkers and locals of the surrounding countryside and across the hills, but no trace was ever found, save for a shepherd's crook found resting against a stone and next to a burnt-out fire. On that occasion it was a young man named Sam Smith, a local from nearby Chesfield, a small village situated low in a valley with a few arable fields and many trees that fringed and protected it from the fierce gales and storms that dominated this rocky landscape. In the event of these disappearances, police did not consider venturing to the compound as it was built and surveilled to keep out unwanted visitors, and any such intrusions were reported to police for investigation. From 1951 to 1954, the disappearances continued, and in total, 8 people from the village were reported missing either from their homes or further afield in the nearby moor, either on foot or from an abandoned motorcar. Each case was thoroughly investigated by the local police at the time, but due to the small county police force's limited resources and expertise, it lacked the necessary capabilities to search this somewhat wild and unforgiving landscape. Consequently, these missing reports remained open on file, which did not alleviate local unease regarding the matter. Some locals took it upon themselves to visit the compound, as they suspected a connection with the work being carried out there, which, to be fair, was more speculation on their part than fact. In every case, they were given short shrift by the guards who ushered them away. Still, fear and hostility were brewing among the 40 residents of Chesfield, and this concern attracted the attention of the Home Office, who decided to dispatch me, Detective Chief Inspector Michael Hazzard, a special branch officer of the Metropolitan Police, to review the reported cases and to visit the Hesse compound to carry out any inquiries. For many years I had worked as a detective on the flying squad, a specialist police department within the Metropolitan Police that focused on major crimes, and received numerous commendations for my commitment to duty. My transfer to Special Branch a few months earlier was a promotion from the rank of Detective Inspector. Another facet which added urgency was a hawk-like interest from the media who had blown these disappearances into something akin to alien abductions, and the Home Secretary believed that a government response from the police could alleviate any fears or concerns the locals had in this matter, and that based on my inquiries, the findings of my report could be published in an edited form for the benefit of the general public. It had been arranged that I would take with me a detective sergeant and 4 detective constables from my department who would assist me with inquiries both on and off the compound. Despite Dr. Hesse's objections that this could compromise his work, it was agreed that none of us would be allowed access into his actual laboratory, and that at all times we would be accompanied on site by his staff. Having arrived in 2 unmarked cars and a van at the village, accommodation was found at the old coaching inn, the Greyhound, a large rambling stone building with a thatched roof, and a fairly friendly ruddy-faced landlord in the form of Isaac Coulthard, a powerfully built man in his mid-40s with a large bushy moustache and a smile to match, who lived at the inn with his wife Isabel and their 2 teenage daughters. As my men unpacked the vehicles, Coulthard stood, revelling in the influx of new customers. Upon seeing me, he excitedly shook my hand. He asked me to follow him inside to a beautiful old-world bar with heavy oak beams and a huge stone Bessemer fireplace, which had an attractive old coat of arms painted on a displayed ancient shield. In every sense and in every way, this building exuded old-world English charm, and I did not doubt that it had changed little from the 18th century. Noticing that I was looking at the shield, he chimed in, "That's the coat of arms for the Chesfield family, who used to live way up yonder in a castle near where the laboratory is." He added solemnly, "Sadly, it was made ruinous in the English Civil War, and the family died out 2 centuries ago. The shield is all that is left." I smiled and said, "Thanks for the history, and what a lovely place this inn is. We will probably be staying with you for a few weeks, and it will make a perfect base for operations, Mr. Coulthard." Almost blushingly he replied, "Thank you, sir. It is an honour to have you Scotland Yard boys here, and during your stay, if there is anything you need, let me know." Having chosen the best room in the house, a large Jacobean-style bedroom with a double oak-frame bed with wainscoting wall panels and an adjoining bathroom, I decided to use this as a hub for my operations, and for that purpose, a desk and lockable filing cabinet was brought with us in the van, and as such was placed in the room by 2 of my men. Here, daily reports of inquiries would be brought to my room and filed. Also installed at the time by the GPO was a secure telephone line. Everything I needed was available and ideally suited to my needs. My men shared the 2 adjacent bedrooms, and the inn provided a full breakfast and evening meal for us all. Additionally, the coaching inn courtyard provided sufficient parking for our vehicles. Reports of these missing persons were provided to me by the local police, and the next day I dispatched the 4 detective constables to re-interview witnesses to try to establish any missing details, and importantly, whether they had any updates to report. In the meantime, I contacted the laboratory and spoke with Dr. Hesse's secretary, who was informed that we would be visiting the site within the next 2 days. So far, everything was in place, and with my colleague Detective Sergeant Douglas Adams, an officer with 20 years' service, and like me, a time-served detective who had worked on the fraud squad. Adams, a man in his mid-40s, was tall and well-built, with a neat trim moustache and a strong military bearing. During the war, he served in the Guards Regiment and was highly decorated for bravery in action during the Italian campaign. He was very much a man's man and commanded much respect from his subordinates. We spent the day driving around the locality and letting any locals we came across know that the police were investigating these disappearances. However, I must say that this did not exactly allay any fears or apprehensions they may have had. They were convinced in some way that the disappearances were linked to the laboratory. We returned before dinner after a fairly uneventful day. where I arranged for us all to meet in my room to share and submit reports on the findings of their investigations. Having found some extra chairs from the inn, the officers from both pairs gave their findings, which, although not revealing any new information, did have one surprising addition. Detective Constable Stan Jones spoke to the father of a missing teenager, Alice Jenkinson, who disappeared 2 years ago, who claimed she was seen by a family friend, Jack Ogden, running across the moors one late evening last May in a heavy rainstorm. She was wearing only a blue one-piece dress and was screaming for help. Behind her, in the haze of the heavy rainstorm, were lights frantically flitting from side to side and growing larger before she and the lights disappeared from view. He, being a strongly religious man, viewed the entirety as something demonic. Although he reported back to the village within 10 minutes, no trace could be found by any subsequent search party, either at night or later during the following day. "Did you speak with Ogden?" I added. "Yes, Gov, we did, and he was convinced she looked like a living corpse. I can't add anything further other than the fact we did check out the locality of where she was seen, but there is nothing there that explains or adds weight to what Ogden is saying." I then spoke to the other pair of detectives. "Have you any fresh info or indeed just rumours to share?" Detective Constable Alan Moore stood up to report that although they had no new leads, the locals they spoke to were convinced that an unknown carnivorous creature was loose on the moor, as sheep were also disappearing. One sheep corpse was found half consumed and devoid of any blood some weeks earlier and in the same areas as the reported missing people. They also felt this creature was somehow connected to the laboratory, as before they moved to the district, nobody and no animal had gone missing from this tight-knit community. After thanking my men for their input, they, except for D.S. Adams, left the room to write their report logs. Turning to him, I said, "Well, Doug, what do you think? The talk of ghosts and monstrous carnivores on the moor suggests that these people have a vivid imagination. Although I have to concur that before Dr. Hesse arrived there were no reported missing people." "Yes, Gov, that's my position entirely. The secrecy employed at the laboratory does open one to suggestions of some malfeasance. Well," I added, "we'll call it a day, and tomorrow you and I will visit this Dr. Hesse. It'll be interesting to get his take on these matters." The following morning, after delegating the detective constables to review the other missing person reports, Doug drove me to the Hesse laboratory. When I arrived, I was somewhat shocked to view the sheer indomitable size and scale of the 20-foot walls and the double-lined electrical fencing. Notices bearing the royal cipher warned people to stay away, and they were further supplemented by signs warning of an electrical shock to anyone who touched the fence. In front of the entrance stood a red and white chevron-barred sentry box with a man dressed in a police-style uniform, complete with a blue tunic, trousers, shirt and tie, and complemented by a peaked hat, standing imperiously in front of a barrier and raising his palm to order us to halt. I then wound down the window alongside him, and the guard demanded to see my identification. I shared my warrant card and explained that we had an appointment with Dr. Hesse. He smartly stood to attention after viewing a clipboard in his possession, and he raised the barrier to drive forward to face a few yards further, a massive sliding steel door set into the walled concrete bastion that this laboratory appeared to be. Again we were confronted by another guard in a similar uniform, who, after verifying our credentials, let us in and directed us to park in a courtyard. My immediate thought was, what type of research goes on here that requires this level of security? Looking around the interior, it didn't have many visible structures within the bastion. It was mainly a large empty courtyard with these massive walls upon which stood other guards. The only visible structure was a small building with another steel sliding door that was our entrance to the laboratory. It seemed obvious that the complex was built underground. Having left our car locked and unattended, we followed another guard into this small structure, which transpired to be an elevator with 13 floors. Having pressed a button numbered 12, we quickly arrived on the floor where Dr. Hesse had his office and accommodation. Greeting us in a white laboratory coat was a 60-year-old man of short but heavy stature, with thick horn-rimmed glasses on a rather small round face. He smiled and shook my hand after saying in perfect English, "Good day, gentlemen. I am Dr. Hesse, the chief scientist and director of this facility. If you follow me, please." He then escorted us down a wide corridor to a brown-panelled door with the nameplate director's offices, which he opened and we entered. Inside we saw a rather plush office with thick heavy carpeting, a large brown mahogany desk, and apart from a captain-style chair behind it were two ordinary wooden chairs placed in front. He walked to the other side of the desk and sat down while sweeping his arm towards both chairs and said, "Please, gentlemen." We both sat down and formally identified ourselves and the reason for our visit. Dr. Hesse grinned and said, "I gather those villagers think I am responsible somehow for these disappearances, which is ridiculous." I said, "I appreciate that your research is kept under wraps, Doctor, but could you possibly outline to a limited degree what you are doing and why the secrecy?" He swivelled briefly in his chair and removed his glasses to clean them whilst appearing to be deep in thought. After a few seconds he put them back on. He again smiled to say, "Well, I am a geneticist, and in this laboratory we are looking at ways to use genetics to improve the lives of people suffering from birth disability, whether physically or mentally, and hopefully to improve the lot of the human race by eradicating disease." He paused briefly and continued, "Obviously I am not at liberty to share with you this research, as our enemies in the Soviet Union or China would weaponize my work to produce quite the opposite effect. And I cannot allow this to happen, which is why I am here in your country, working alongside your government." I said, "May I ask why you chose this site in the middle of Dartmoor?" "I wanted my laboratory below ground, and the sedimentary rock base here is stable enough to build the 13 floors for research. Although you may not have noticed, there are nearly 50 people, including security, who live and work here. In the event of a nuclear strike, we have enough supplies to maintain life here for 10 years. Doug Adams then interjected, "Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but if you are engaged in this research, what do you use as subject matter?" Dr. Hesse frowned and leaned forward towards Doug to say, "Well, Sergeant, we are not experimenting on humans, if that is what you are implying. I chose to live in neutral Switzerland during the war, as I was strongly opposed to the Nazis' clinical research on Jews and Russians." He then stood to his feet and ushered us back into the corridor where, to be honest, I thought he was going to show us the door. Instead, he took us to another room which was filled with animal cages containing laboratory rats, dogs, cats, mice and monkeys. "Here, gentlemen, is our subject material. I appreciate you have a job to do and understand the reasoning behind your questions, but we do not use humans or have had contact with any person outside this facility, especially those reported missing from that village." Doug apologized and said, "Thank you, sir, for appreciating why we are here, but what we cannot understand is why so many people have gone missing, and especially after your team came here." He waved both his hands down as if to calm a non-existent outburst of emotions and said, "I paid to build here from my funds because I believe in a better future for humanity. Your government are now on board with me and supports my work financially. In return, they inspect my laboratory regularly and I supply them with research updates. I can say that we are looking at improving sources of animal protein, and in that regard, our biological research is very much focused. That is all I can really add. I am sure you'll understand the need for keeping our cards close to our chests." As we were about to leave, red warning lights fitted to the walls began to flash, and another laboratory-coated man, tall and slim with short, trimmed brown hair, entered the room and whispered in Dr. Hesse's ear. Looking very concerned, Dr. Hesse said, "I'm afraid you will have to leave the facility as there is a drill in progress. My colleague, Dr. Hawkson, will escort you back out. If you need to come back at another time, please feel free to do so, gentlemen." He then disappeared into the corridor while Dr. Hawkson, the only Englishman on the team, escorted us to the elevator, which quickly returned us to the compound above. As we were travelling up, Dr. Hawkson attempted to make light conversation, but like Hesse, he appeared to have something on his mind. We were then escorted by a guard back to the car, and we left. As we were driving back to the village, we discussed our meeting with Dr. Hesse and his facility, and the so-called drill reported at the end. We both felt that Hesse and his team were covering up something quite serious that they were prepared to keep secret, but at least superficially his raison d'etre seemed legitimate and above board. We also discussed the report of the missing teenager, Alice Jenkinson, who was seen running for her life. It did not seem far-fetched to suggest that the lights behind her were nothing more than flashlights, and that there were people in pursuit of her. Doug suggested that perhaps they were conducting research on people, and that this girl was attempting to escape when she was seen. To this end, we decided to speak with the inn's owner, Isaac Coulthard, who seemed to be knowledgeable about the area's history and geography. We arrived back around lunchtime, and after consuming a meal prepared by Isaac's wife, we invited him to sit with us at a table in the bar. Like most folk when asked to speak with the police, he appeared a little concerned, but smiled with a forced bravado. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" he said nervously. I smiled at him. "No need to worry, Isaac. Sorry if you don't mind me being informal." He nodded and smiled. "Well, you mentioned to me the history of the Chesfield family and the now long-gone castle. Are there any ruins as such left?" He replied, "Just a few base walls, sir, nothing more. The vaulted medieval cellars are long gone, but the bases of the walls can be inspected, sir." He then loaned me a local map showing where the castle ruins were, and only half a mile from the laboratory. "Are you and your boys planning to have a picnic there, sir?" he inquired jokingly. I replied, "No, I just wanted to check out the topography of the area, and I noticed that the ruins are not far from where the Jenkinson girl was seen. Interesting." Thanking him for his assistance, we waited in my room for my men to return, which they duly did late in the afternoon. None of them had much to report, but we shared our findings at the laboratory, and we all agreed the operation there seemed suspicious. We also decided to travel over to the castle ruins in the early morning of the following day to search the site for any possible openings in the ground which may have explained the presence of the girl. For this purpose, I ordered the men to dress informally and to bring any tools, ropes, lights or other items in the event of such a discovery. With that, all were dismissed for the day while I made a telephone call to my boss, Detective Chief Superintendent Hartley at Scotland Yard. The purpose of the call was to discuss my visit to Hesse, and he agreed that there was a possibility that Hesse wasn't being entirely open and honest. However, as this matter involved the Home Office, we would focus more on the mystery of the missing people. I agreed and informed him that we were planning to conduct a more detailed sweep of the area the following day, and I would report accordingly. At 9 a.m. the following morning, the 5 of us drove up to near the site of the old castle. Leaving our vehicle parked just off the roadside, we surveyed the rocky landscape and agreed it was going to be a rather tricky place to search. However, I instructed them to report any irregularities they discovered on site to me immediately. Like the outspread fingers of the hand, we spread out our search across the castle site, very slowly but meticulously. It was a bright, warm day, and the light helped cast shadows that delineated areas not immediately observable to the human eye. After an hour, we were about to call it a day when Stan Jones cried out in the distance, "Over here, Gov!" He was bending over a rock and pointed his hand towards it in a rather excited manner. I blew my police whistle, which was a signal to stop. I instructed everyone to meet with Stan, who I must say was an extremely diligent young officer and in later years retired as a police superintendent. Anyway, to cut to the chase, we gathered around Stan and I asked him to share his observations. Pointing at a crevice next to this large flat rock, he said, If you look closely at the gravel, it looks like the rock has been swiveled around. You can see the striations it has left there. His observation was impeccable. He saw the marks initially as faint shadows from the sun, and it was clear that someone had moved that stone. Gathering ropes and hooks from the boot of the car, we tied them to the rock in a fashion which would allow us to pull and rotate the stone. After some effort, we heard a loud click, as though something had been broken, and the stone easily swiveled around. As we discovered later, it was rotating on a hidden metal rod, which acted as a giant hinge. Beneath the gaping hole, which was circular and 3 feet in circumference, we could see the top of a metal ladder leading into darkness. I elected to enter first, and with a rope tied to my waist, I clambered down with a flashlight into a huge cavernous room which appeared to be part of the undercroft of the lost castle. Around me I could see medieval carved pillars supporting a stone roof, and in the distance a tunnel, which appeared to date to the same period as the undercroft. In one corner I found a box of ready-charged flashlights, which seemed to have been left recently, as no dust had gathered on the box. I called quietly to the rest of my men to join me, and they were as much in awe and shocked as I was. This discovery seemed to explain the sighting of the missing girl, but where did the tunnel lead to? I ordered that firstly we push back the stone to cover the hole, and from within it was easier to do so through some mechanical gears and a lever. With the flashlights we found, and those already in our possession, we entered the tunnel, which, if my sense of direction was correct, led in the direction of the laboratory site. About 10 minutes into the roughly hewn rock tunnel, Doug heard something and told us to stand and keep quiet. It was a slopping sound that was discerned at first faintly in the darkness of the tunnel. We crept forward, shielding our flashlights so that they shone barely enough light onto the ground. The slopping sound grew louder and was accompanied by the sound of something wet sliding, and then a low, gargling, growling sound, as whatever this was had heard us. At the same time, water was dripping quite fast from the tunnel roof, and the ground was slippery and challenging to walk on. A couple of times we all slipped and fell to discover a mucus-like substance on our hands and clothing. It seemed apparent to me that there was some creature abounding in the tunnel, and I was certain it wasn't any creature known to mainstream science. The growling was weird. It, like the other sounds, appeared a wet sucking noise, and we decided at that point to return back to where we started to get assistance and weapons to be safe. Whatever this was may be the reason so many had disappeared. I left 2 men posted at the entrance and returned to the inn, where I contacted my superior and explained in detail our findings. Whatever it was, it sounded like no creature known to science and may be responsible for the disappearances. He agreed not to contact the laboratory. Instead, he contacted the Home Secretary directly, who authorized the use of firearms. To this end, additional officers who were permitted to carry firearms arrived in 3 vans 2 hours later, carrying enough Smith & Wesson .38 handguns to issue to every man present. In total, there were 20 of us, with 5 being plainclothes and the others in uniform. Due to the rather wet and slippery nature of the tunnel, each man was issued a boiler suit and a mining helmet equipped with its own light. Additional armed support remained in the area in case assistance was needed, and a temporary base for wireless communications was established. We were also given a cover story that we were seeking a dangerous criminal from Dartmoor prison, and we advised the laboratory, villagers and hill farmers to be on their guard and remain where they were. By 7 p.m. that day, we were prepared to go in with the tactical officers leading the way. For the first 15 minutes, there was silence in the tunnel with no weird or adverse sounds heard. As we advanced further, the walls and roof of the tunnel glistened with dripping water, and other than these sounds, there was silence until the tunnel started to rise slightly, as though we entered a gradient. It was then, and only then, that we were caught off guard. From the light in my hand and the light on my helmet, 5 men in front were swallowed up by something I would describe as a black, slimy, sinuous lump as it dropped from the roof. Before us we could see the trapped outlines of the men's bodies as they were lying prostrate on the ground, and they quickly disappeared or were absorbed by this thing as it sucked and slurped on their bodies. There was silence, complete silence, as this thing made their body shapes disappear. We fired our revolvers, hitting this thing with a multitude of bullets until our chambers were spent, but this thing seemingly grew bigger as it rose in the air, followed by a filthy stench, an acrid evil smell of death. It then slopped its body on the ground and absorbed 2 more men, and at that point I knew we were done for. But then a powerful light appeared from behind this creature, and then the fire from 2 flamethrowers, which caused it to writhe and scream in the most hideous sound I have ever heard. As the flames shot into its slimy, shapeless body, the covering or skin of it bubbled and burst, releasing a grey mucus blister that spluttered its filth onto the floor. It went silent as it burned, and the acrid smoke forced us to retreat briefly. As the smoke cleared, the flamethrowers stopped shooting spouts of fire, and we heard the voice of Dr. Hesse, who shouted, "You may come through now, it is destroyed." Together with the survivors, which thankfully included all my men, we joined Hesse and his men as he led us from his end of the tunnel into the laboratory complex. Leaving my men and the other officers at the canteen area in the first level, I accompanied him to his office. Hesse, who was wearing a flame-resistant suit, said, "Okay, Chief Inspector, this creature was a biological mishap resulting from an experiment to create a hybrid between a cyphozoa and a gastropod, which would provide a fast-growing protein that, when dried, could be made into food pellets for distribution to third-world countries suffering from starvation. The protein also carried an enzyme which, when absorbed into the body, would give instant immunization from a variety of diseases, and as such could feed and save the world." "Okay, Doctor, it all sounded laudable, so what on earth went wrong?" "This creature should never have been created. It was an abomination of science, with an intelligence matched to a predatory streak that it used to attack and consume prey when it escaped onto the moors," he added. "What brought this chimeric organism together was an alien bacterium I discovered in Switzerland. It displayed many properties which allowed it to adapt to any environment." He continued, "Apart from sheep, it also consumed those individuals who were missing, and we were tracking it to destroy it. But it was difficult to capture because it could adapt and camouflage itself in any environment." "And was that alarm the day of my visit a warning that their creature was active?" "The red alert you experienced was when it attempted to re-enter the compound via our emergency escape tunnel. But being smarter and more adept, it escaped again. The Home Office was fully aware of the situation, but they hoped that by getting you and your men involved, they could bring official closure." I was angry. So we could have been the sacrificial goats if matters turned out differently. Hesse apologized profusely, but as he explained that in science there are always risks, but this risk became a threat and a challenge. But one matter could never be explained. Was that the actual ghost of the missing teenager, Alice Jenkinson, seen on the moors? However, Hesse's laboratory was closed down shortly afterwards, and Hesse and his research were transferred to the government research facility at Porton Down, where he later disappeared under unusual circumstances. The end.